Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have come together to form the Alliance of the Sahel, AES, a groundbreaking coalition that has been actively shaping its strategy since its first conference in June 2024. This alliance was created with a clear mission: to unite their resources in the fight against long-standing insecurity that has plagued the region for decades. To achieve this, the bloc has taken a historic step by forming its own joint military force, something the regional organization ECOWAS has never managed to accomplish. In support of this initiative, Russia has provided military experts and weaponry to help combat insurgency and instability in the region. The idea of a united front among these nations gained momentum on December 1, 2023, when the foreign ministers of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali announced plans to create a confederation. This move was widely celebrated across Africa, as many viewed it as a crucial step toward true Pan-African unity. During a two-day meeting in Bamako, the top diplomats of the three nations discussed ways to strengthen their partnership in key areas such as security, development, and diplomacy. Mali's foreign minister, Abdoulaye Diop, stated that each country's leader would review the proposed strategies before finalizing decisions at an upcoming summit. The much-anticipated confederation was officially launched in July 2024, marking the alliance's formal entry into regional politics. One of its first major initiatives is the deployment of a joint force of 5,000 soldiers to combat organized crime and terrorism across the Sahel. As mentioned earlier, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso established AES not only to improve security, but also to drive economic and social progress in a region that remains one of Africa's poorest. Despite being rich in resources and strategically located, the Sahel has struggled to prosper due to decades of foreign exploitation, particularly by France. However, the governments of these three nations are now determined to take control of their own future. The creation of AES is a direct effort to unify the people of the Sahel, eliminate external influence, and foster development on their own terms. A key focus of this alliance is securing the tri-border area where Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali meet. This region, abundant in mineral wealth, has been heavily targeted by terrorist groups and criminal organizations. By forming a joint military force, the AES aims to protect its resources, stabilize the region, and reclaim control over its destiny. Gaining full control of this region will not only bring an end to insecurity, but will also allow the government to maximize the use of available resources for regional development. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more updates like this. Niger's Defense Minister, General Salifou Modi, has confirmed that a joint task force of 5,000 soldiers is fully prepared to defend the region. Now, our forces can operate together and respond effectively, he stated. Modi emphasized the importance of cooperation in tackling security threats, adding that the AES Joint Force is nearly ready for deployment. This specialized force will operate across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, utilizing air, ground, and intelligence assets to enhance security. The most significant part? Deployment is just a few weeks away. By forming the AES, these three nations aim to create a more coordinated and effective security framework. According to Modi, joint assessments are already underway to improve coordination and strengthen regional defense. To further support AES, Russia has stepped in by supplying military equipment and instructors to the three nations. This was announced by Tatiana Dovgalenko, head of the Russian Foreign Ministry's Africa Cooperation Division. Russia is contributing to the region's security by training military and law enforcement personnel, providing weapons, and aiding in social and economic development. Dovgalenko described the alliance as a vital step toward uniting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger in securing their national interests while also advancing their economic and social goals. Since the new military leadership took charge in these nations, Russia has been one of the most active foreign partners offering assistance. Each of these countries has received military equipment from Russia. For example, when Burkina Faso was denied weapons by Western nations, Russia stepped in to provide crucial military aid. Following several coup attempts, Russian military instructors were sent to support President Traoré and enhance Burkina Faso's defense capabilities. Mali has also benefited from Russian support, recently receiving a shipment of military hardware. The convoy included armored KMAZ trucks, engineering vehicles, and 4x4 armored personnel carriers such as Spartak, Linza, and Tiger models. Additionally, anti-aircraft weapons, D-30 towed artillery pieces, and patrol boats were delivered to bolster Mali's security forces. Given the ongoing terrorist threats in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, this military assistance is critical. However, there's one important point to consider. Western nations have long claimed to be Africa's biggest development partners, but their actions tell a different story. Think about it. The United States and France maintained a presence in these Sahelian nations for years, yet they never prioritized advanced security solutions like satellite surveillance. Isn't it odd that despite their resources, they failed to provide real solutions to the growing security crisis? But perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. This pattern aligns with the West's long-standing approach to Africa, offering minimal support while maintaining control rather than truly empowering African nations to stand on their own. The United States has maintained a large military base in Niger, fully equipped with advanced technology to gather intelligence and monitor activities across West Africa. While France operated on a smaller scale, it still had similar facilities in all three countries. As a result, the U.S. collects vast amounts of intelligence on terrorist movements, which it selectively shares with France. However, rather than providing Niger or other affected nations with full access to this critical information, the U.S. either withholds details or provides only partial intelligence. This lack of transparency was one of the key reasons Niger's military government decided to cut ties with the United States. According to a military spokesperson, the previous democratic government of Niger had signed an agreement with the U.S. that did not require the Americans to share any of the intelligence they gathered. This meant that Niger only received the information the U.S. deemed necessary, keeping the country in a state of dependence. This strategy is nothing new. Historically, Western powers have ensured that African nations remain reliant on them. During the colonial era, European countries deliberately prevented Africa from building industries that could process its raw materials. The goal was clear: to keep African economies dependent on Western manufactured goods. Even today, the West claims to support Africa's development, yet it rarely transfers advanced technology or helps establish large-scale industries. Have you ever wondered why? The reason is simple. An economically independent Africa would pose a challenge to Western interests. To maintain influence, Western countries interfere in African politics, ensuring that corrupt leaders remain in power as allies. They then provide financial aid, not to empower African nations, but to keep them within their sphere of control. However, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are now changing this narrative. These nations are asserting their sovereignty and refusing to be trapped in this cycle of dependency. To gain direct access to critical security technology, they signed an agreement with Russia to acquire satellite capabilities. And the deal was successful. In light of recent attacks in Burkina Faso and Mali, the need for this technology has become even more urgent. Consider the recent assault by the JNIM terrorist group, which targeted an airport and a military training center in Bamako, marking the first attack on Mali's capital in years. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the town of Barcelogo, strategically positioned as the last military outpost protecting the capital, Ouagadougou, was also attacked. The violence resulted in around 300 deaths, highlighting the need for better surveillance and response capabilities. A satellite system will be a game-changer for Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Beyond security, it will also enhance communication infrastructure by enabling radio and television broadcasts, expanding internet and phone services to remote areas, and modernizing connectivity across the entire Sahel region. This growing partnership between Russia and the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, is only strengthening. But, as expected, the West has strongly criticized this alliance. However, what truly upsets Western powers isn't corruption, human rights abuses, or failures in governance. Their real concern is any nation that dares to break free from their influence and chart its own course toward independence. Aligning with Russia or any country that the West opposes is often seen as one of the most serious offenses a nation can commit. Take countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, for instance. Gabon and Chad have also experienced military coups and are now under military rule. But because their leaders chose to align with Russia rather than the West, Western media has focused more on Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. In contrast, Chad and Gabon maintain good relations with Western nations. The media tends to scrutinize and criticize these nations whenever they make decisions linked to their alliance with Russia. It's almost as if their leaders have no autonomy in their choices. The idea that Russia is pulling the strings in these countries' decisions is often pushed, even though these nations' leaders made the choice themselves. This is why the Western media frequently points out that these countries shifted away from the West to strengthen their ties with Russia whenever discussing nations in the AES group. They also consistently mention that Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger rely on Russian Wagner mercenaries, who the West accuses of human rights violations. But, in reality, this is mostly used to create a negative image of Russia and its allies. While Wagner might have committed some of the alleged offenses, the West tends to exaggerate these claims through its media in an attempt to reduce Russia's influence in Africa. Meanwhile, the West's actions in Africa often surpass Wagner's in scale. Take the satellite agreements Russia has made with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, for example. These agreements would likely help the countries, especially in addressing instability. However, the West criticizes them. Why? The main concern for the West isn't just about the African nations gaining more independence, but rather that this is seen as another move by Russia to increase its power in the Sahel region. The West, particularly the US and France, are frustrated because these nations in the Sahel have moved away from them in favor of Russia. As a result, any deal Russia makes with an African nation is viewed with suspicion, as if it's a strategy to further Russian dominance. Moreover, the West fears that the satellite agreements will lead to more Russian propaganda and disinformation campaigns. But what exactly does this mean? When the coups took place in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, they sparked a rise in anti-Western sentiment, which ultimately led to the breakdown of Western partnerships. The West used its media to push the narrative that Russia was behind the coups and the growing anti-Western feelings. Lately, there's been a growing narrative in Western media that Russia is behind the reason why many African nations are hesitant to work solely with the West. This idea, however, is deeply insulting to Africa, as it suggests that the continent lacks awareness and is easily manipulated. The West has accused Russia of spreading misinformation about them, which is supposedly turning Africans against Western countries. This stems from a paternalistic and superiority complex that many Western nations still hold. They seem to believe that Africans are incapable of independent thought, and that their growing anti-Western sentiment is solely due to Russian influence. How naive is that? The truth is, Russia isn't responsible for the anti-West feelings spreading across Africa, despite what the West might want to believe. The reality is that Africa has grown tired of the West's patronizing attitude and constant interference, which has largely served to benefit Western countries at Africa's expense. For the past 150 years, Western involvement in Africa has brought nothing but instability, poverty, and hardship. Africa understands this, which is why many nations in the Sahel region have chosen to align with Russia instead of the West. This shift is not a temporary phase. It's a sign of something bigger happening on the continent, something the West is worried about but doesn't fully understand. African leaders have come to realize they don't need the West's influence to thrive. They now recognize that their sovereignty is not as controlled by the West as it once was. This change is happening for three key reasons. First, the rise of new global powers like China and Russia has shifted the global balance. It's no longer just about the West. Now countries like China, Russia, Iran, India, and Turkey are playing key roles. The West sees China and Russia in particular as direct threats to its dominance and has attempted to limit their power through sanctions and laws. Despite these efforts, these countries have found ways to challenge Western power and even outpace the West in certain areas. Additionally, these rising powers have not only gained a stronger voice in global matters, but have also increased their economic presence in Africa. Through investments and trade, they are challenging the influence of traditional Western powers in the region. For instance, in just 20 years, China has become Africa's largest trading partner. Since 2000, trade between Africa and China has been growing by 20% each year, reaching $188 billion by 2015. This is more than 3 times the trade Africa has with India, its second-largest partner. Russia, too, is increasing its political and trade relations with Africa. These countries, along with others, have formed BRICS, an economic alliance that is increasingly seen as a challenge to established Western financial institutions like the World Bank and IMF. These non-Western nations are also interested in Africa, just like Western countries, but the difference is they're not trying to control African economies, military forces, or interfere in politics. Instead, their relationship with Africa is built on mutual respect and equality, ensuring the interests of both sides are protected. Despite the West's attempts to keep Africa isolated and under its influence, this approach is no longer working. Africa is now aware of its power and position in the world. With more options available, the continent won't be pushed into decisions it doesn't want to make. The West realizes that the balance is shifting, and its long-standing dominance in Africa is being challenged. This is why Western countries, especially the US and France, are scrambling to stop Africa from strengthening ties with non-Western nations. They are trying to change their approach toward Africa, holding meetings and discussions to renegotiate deals. France, for example, has warned African countries not to engage with Russia. However, the truth is, things won't go back to how they were, no matter what the West does. Africa's leaders are now more confident and will continue to demand better deals and terms for their nations. Africa no longer belongs solely to the West. It's a continent that stands on its own. What are your thoughts? Feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Check out the next recommended video. Watch now!